Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to speak to the motion to create a national strategy to reduce food waste and combat food security. I do believe that this motion put forward by the Liberal member is presented with good intentions, but like most of the things that the Liberals have done for the last 9 years, the unintended consequences of good intentions, I think, would cause more problems than it would solve. So let's start with the facts. Over 20% of food produced in Canada goes uneaten and is considered wasted. It's also true that many Canadian families are dealing with critical levels of food insecurity. So this government thinks that reducing food waste then is the solution for the problem of food insecurity, and that's where, of course, the narrative falls apart. It's not food waste that's causing spiraling food prices. Canadians, by and large, could afford to put food on the table just 9 short years ago. In a single month last year, there were 2 million visits to food banks in Canada. Today, food banks are expecting to see 1 million more people use their facilities on top of last year's record high, and a third of food banks say they will have to turn hungry Canadians away. It's incredibly saddening that this government has put parents in such a precarious position that we now seem to need a national school food program in order to make sure that children have food to eat when their parents used to be able to afford to buy it for them. So no, food waste is not necessarily the most pressing issue. The reason that we are even speaking to this motion today is due to the inflationary spending and outrageous agricultural policies that have been implemented by a government that clearly does not understand the industry. The result of these disastrous policies is that the average Canadian family will have to pay up to $700 more in food in 2024 than it just did last year in 2023, and that's just 1 year's worth of inflationary increases, Madam Speaker. So after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, the price of beef is up 30%, chicken's up 34%, rice 30%, eggs 38%, apples 39%, butter 45%, tomatoes 63%, fish 28%, lettuce 48%, flour 25%, potatoes 60%, and baby formula up 27%. And I could continue, Madam Speaker, but I think Canadians watching get the point. It turns out that there are consequences to taxing our farmers, truckers, and grocers. But what are the examples of some of these disastrous policies? A prime example, of course, is the carbon tax. This tax has done little for the environment, but has driven up the cost of food, as the cost of carbon pricing compounds through the supply chain with every single transaction that the food system endures. Conservatives understand the costs borne by our agricultural sector. That's why my colleague from Huron, Bruce, introduced Bill C-234 to expand carbon tax exemptions, of course, for our struggling farmers and the agricultural sector. The bill would have saved $978 million by removing the carbon tax on natural gas and propane for drying grain, as well as heating and cooling barns, greenhouses, and other structures. That's $1 billion that has to be added into the price of food for Canadians. Yet recently, the Liberal Party-aligned senators masquerading as independents gutted most of the exemptions from Bill 234, with Liberals proposing a 30% fertilizer emissions reduction target on top of this. They claim that, which they claim is voluntary, even though it's not. It's no wonder that Canadian farmers clearly mistrust this government. Ironically enough, this government laments the issue of food waste when one of their own misguided policies has actually exacerbated the problem. In 2022, they put a self-imposed ban on PEI potatoes being exported to the United States. In doing so, they are mischaracterizing the entire province of PEI as being infested with potato warts. During this incident, they spent $28 million to destroy almost 300 million pounds of potatoes. And that sounds like fairly significant food waste to me. Maybe the government should indict themselves as part of this new strategy. And if the past is any indicator of the future, then it seems that the Liberals have not yet learned from their failures in the realm of agriculture. Not long ago, the government indicated that it was looking at a P2 plastic ban as part of its commitment to move toward zero plastic waste. This policy seeks to ban plastic non-compostable price lookup stickers and plastic packaging for fresh produce. Although the government has paraded this plastics ban as an environmental initiative, a report commissioned by the Canadian Food Marketing Association and produced by Deloitte has found that this simply is not the case. They concluded that the P2 plastics ban could increase greenhouse gas emissions by 50% or 22 million metric tons of CO2. Deloitte has also found that it fails at reducing waste. Alternatives to plastic packaging have consistently failed to meet modified atmospheric requirements. They also fail to meet the standard for foodborne illnesses. It has been estimated that the reduction in shelf life engendered by the loss of these plastic products could increase fresh produce waste by more than 50%. Wow. This would constitute a loss of more than 1 million tons of fresh produce every year. Woke packaging laws creating food waste. Finally, it has been reported that the loss of these products could raise the cost of food by 35% and reduce the availability of fresh produce by 50%. This would cost our industry $5.6 billion, and the cost would, of course, be borne directly by the consumer. These are the same consumers that are already struggling to put food on the table. Furthermore, the lower consumption of fresh produce would have a trickle-down effect, roughly costing $1 billion a year to our healthcare system. This increased cost would be borne disproportionately in rural and remote regions of Canada, already struggling with the increased costs of shipping. I would now like to delineate what this new national strategy to reduce food waste and combat insecurity actually does, and why we actually don't need it. It calls for the establishment of a national food waste hierarchy. Sounds like a lot of bureaucracy to me. Alignment of municipal and provincial regulations concerning food waste reduction and food donations. We already have many organizations across the country doing their own thing with their own initiatives. They don't need any further direction, especially from Ottawa. Leading efforts to reduce the adverse environmental impact of unused food resources, establishing protocols and partnerships to facilitate food redistribution and rescue efforts, identifying a policy and fiscal incentives to reduce food waste. Sounds like creating a lot of jobs for bureaucrats, but I'm not sure we're actually going to put more food, affordable food, on the tables for Canadians. So you can see what, again, what a list of good intentions looks like, but it's actually not necessary in any way, shape, or form. To us Conservatives, this reads as an excuse to expand the bureaucracy. Little emphasis is being put on doing work to solve the issue, but it will create more administrative positions and more government, and the government has already grown by over 50% since 2015, Madam Speaker. Inflationary pressure, putting pressure on the economy, interest rates, and driving up the cost of food even more. Besides, the Liberal government has already spent $20 million towards this initiative under their Food Waste Reduction Challenge in 2020, and the industry is making rapid strides in reducing food waste on their own. If the Liberals wanted a ready-made strategy without spending any more money, they could adopt the National Zero Waste Council's report titled A Food Loss and Waste Strategy for Canada, referencing their work as a national strategy. I would like to conclude by stating that a national strategy to reduce food waste and combat food security is not needed at the federal level. Not only can the issue of food insecurity be placed squarely on the shoulders of the government and their ideologically motivated policies, but they've learned nothing from the previous mistakes that they have made. Imagine being a government that has mismanaged so much of the economy and the cost of living that salvation somehow lies in feeding food that's destined for the waste stream to millions of now hungry Canadians. You can't be the solution when you're the problem, and this NDP Liberal government is simply not worth the cost. It's time for a Conservative government that will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime.